A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
Chazal state that the forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, instituted the daily prayers. Where do we find in the Torah that the Avot instituted 3 daily tefillot?
The usual quote that we hear in this context is that which is stated in the Talmud Bavli, Masechet Berachot, Daf Kaf Waw Amud Bet 26b. The language of the Talmud Bavli brings 2 opinions. One opinion holds that Tefillot Avot Tikkanum, which means literally the Tefillot were instituted, Tiknu. Avot Tikkanum, they were instituted by the forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and then the Talmud goes on to bring a pasuk, a verse, for each of the forefathers, from where we can draw the conclusion that they themselves prayed at these times of the day, Shaharit, Mincha, and Arvit, morning, afternoon, and evening. The other opinion in the Talmud Bavli, Berachot 26b, is that the tefillot, the 3 daily tefillot that we today daven, are based on the korbanot, or the temidim. In the language of the Talmud Bavli, keneged temidim tikkanum, that the chachamim, one assumes the references to Anshe Knesset HaGadolah, who are mentioned in the same Masechet Berachot, Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph 33a, as being the Chachamim who instituted Tefillot in general. So one understands that this is a reference to Anshe Knesset HaGadolah, who instituted the Tefillot based on the Korbanot that the Torah prescribes. If we think about this language of the Talmud Bavli for a moment, we see that there is a big difference between saying Tefillot Avot Tikkanum, that the Tefillot were instituted by the forefathers, and saying that Tefillot Keneged Temidim Tikkanum. Because if you say the Tefillot were instituted by Anshe Knesset HaGadolah to correspond to the korbanot, the temidim, the tamid shel shachar, the tamid shel ben ha'arbaim, the morning sacrifice, the afternoon sacrifice, and the evening tefillah is connected to the whatever remained from the day's sacrifices that was allowed to burn throughout the night. If one says that, then we understand the historical context and the process that occurred here. We understand that at a certain point in history, approximately 2,500 years ago, Anshe Knesset HaGadolah, based on the concept of the Korbanot, felt that it was correct for every Jew on a regular basis to pray to Hashem 3 times a day, and to fix those tefillot relative to the times of the different Korbanot. So the morning tefillah corresponds to the time frame in which the Tamid Shel Shachar, the morning sacrifice, was offered, etc. If, on the other hand, we say Tefillot Avot Tikkanum, that the Tefillot were instituted, this is the language of the Talmud Bavli, they were instituted by the Avot, by Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, which means we're going back almost 4,000 years, then that is a very difficult proposition to understand, and a very difficult statement to accept at face value, because there is no indication in the Torah, there is no indication in the Nevi'im, anywhere in the Tanakh, and even after that point, even the time of Daniel, who was before Anshe Knesset HaGadolah, and it mentions in Sefer Daniel that he used to daven 3 times a day, but it doesn't sound as if all the Jews were doing this at that time. So to claim that the Avot instituted this, in other words, they fixed this concept and made it a hard and fast rule, this is something which smacks of being a somewhat romanticized conception of the matter, and not historically accurate. If, however, we compare this statement of the Talmud Bavli to that which appears in the Talmud Yerushalmi in Masechet Berachot at the beginning of Perek Daled, chapter 4, there we find a different style, a different usage linguistically to explain this concept. There the Talmud Yerushalmi states, that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, Tefiloth me'avoth lemadum. It doesn't say the avot tikenum, it says me'avot lemadum, that the forefathers, the Chachamim, that is to say, Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, learned this concept and learned that and understood that this is a good and necessary idea that every Jew should daven regularly on a regular basis every day to Hashem. They learned this from the avot, from the forefathers. In other words, there is no claim that the forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, made such a takana, made such a halacha, as it were, before there was even a Torah, let alone a Torah She'Ba'al Peh. There's no claim that there was such a halacha, as it were, in existence 4,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. There is no claim that all Jews were required to do so, going back well before the time of Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. Rather, the claim is that the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, which was at the beginning of the Second Temple period, which was a group which consisted of many great sages, including many of whom were prophets, people who were on the level of prophecy, and people who were in practice prophets and whose words were recorded in the Tanakh. These people based this takana, this halacha, as we know it, of having to daven 3 times a day, they based this on what they found in the Torah, hinted at least in the Torah, regarding the actions of the avot, of the forefathers who did pray to Hashem, from what we can tell in the Tanakh, on a regular basis. And that is a very big difference, because that immediately makes the statement a down-to-earth, realistic, and non-romanticized statement, a statement which we can understand in historical and rational terms. We don't have to assume something which is patently unrealistic and almost irrational. And if one looks at the wording of the Rambam in Ilchot Melachim, Perek Tet, one sees something very similar. And I'll quote the words of the Rambam. Rambam writes in Ilchot Melachim or Milhamoth that all human beings are required to keep the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. And then he goes on to say that this was the tradition that was known to people like Noah, etc. V'chen haya hadavar b'chol ha'olam ad Avraham. And this was the case until the time of Avraham, who was then commanded to add another mitzvah, which was the mitzvah of milah, of circumcision. And then he adds, Wahu hithpalel shaharith, and he, Avraham, davened shaharith. That is to say, that he made it his own personal practice on a regular basis to pray a morning prayer, to pray to Hashem in the morning. Yitzchak hifrish ma'aser, and we see in the Torah explicitly that Yitzchak speaks about giving a tithe to Hashem. Wahosif tefillah aheret lifnot hayom, and he added, as a personal minhag, as a practice that he took upon himself, to pray every day in the evening, towards evening, in the afternoon, late afternoon. And the same for Yaakov is recorded here, that Yaakov took upon himself to pray the evening prayer. What we see from here is that the Rambam, like the Talmud Yerushalmi, describes a personal practice, a custom of Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov. And yes, it's true, Yitzchak learned from Avraham, and in fact he even added his own prayer at another time of the day. And Yaakov learned from both his father and his grandfather and added a tefillah in the evening. But it doesn't speak about any kind of takana, which historically is, of course, what we would expect. And this is exactly what we saw in the Talmud Yerushalmi. So we have to understand 2 things, therefore, in summary. First of all, often people claim Hazal say such and such, and one has to often check very well to see exactly what this source that is being quoted exactly is, where it is to be found. Sometimes there may be such a source, and there also may be other parallel sources which differ in some way from that particular source, and people tend to quote only the one source rather than the other. In the case of the Talmud Bavli, more people are familiar with the Talmud Bavli than with the Talmud Yerushalmi, and they tend to quote that the statement in the words of the Talmud Bavli, but this is not always necessarily the only version, and it's not always necessarily the most accurate or the most correct or the most reasonable wording of the matter at hand. And second of all, we see from here that the Talmud Yerushalmi and the Rambam's approach is a more down-to-earth, non-romantical, historically accurate and rational approach, which explains the true development and evolution of the Torah within the Jewish people from time immemorial, from the time of the Avot and down to the present day.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the Rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Berkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the Rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.